Hello, everyone. So Cosimo Winkler speaking. I'm from the Agence Française de Développement, and I'm happy to have you here to present you Fin4Dev, so an approach that has been created by the AFD, and that I will be presenting you for the next 20 minutes, hopefully. And then what I will be doing is basically presenting all the different materials that we'll be doing. So here we'll be coming with the PowerPoint presentation. I'll just be present. So here will be coming. Sorry, there seems to be a little challenge, technical. Please wait. Actually, this is not the good slide. We have another one. Sorry for that. So thank you very much. So what is basically Fin4Dev? What are we doing? This is an approach that basically, so we can go, here it is. So what we'll be presenting? We'll be presenting basically the AFD, we'll go 3 steps. First, the AFD approach on financial systems. This is an approach that we have been developing. What are we doing with the Fin4Dev approach? And finally, some examples, basically. We can go next. So what is the Agence Française de Développement? So just as a reminder, so the Agence Française de Développement has been launching the Financing Commons Summit, basically. And what we are is we are the French Agency for Development. So we are the public international bank. We work in all the 5 continents. We're basically a group. We work on different transitions, on different development issues. We are investing in more than 100 countries, and we are 100% Paris aligned, and we work with different instruments. What do we do? What do we do basically going forward? We work on different themes. So we were saying and on basically water, energy, etc. But we have a specific approach on financial systems. Financial systems for us have been now strategized through a single document that is public. And what we do here in Fin4Dev approach is basically a product of this element. We work with 3 goals that are access, transitions, and consolidation. These are all for financial systems. What do we do? What do we want? Basically, we want so that all the different beneficiaries that could access financial services, we will work on projects that help them access these projects. What kind of access do we speak? We're speaking of excluded populations, SMEs. We're speaking of territories that do not have access. What are we speaking of transitions? It's going for initiating transitions, so towards green energies, towards better agricultural systems. We're also speaking of accelerating them where they already exist. And finally, a last point that we do in our strategy is consolidate. We want financial systems to be more resilient, more adapted, and help all the actors that are there. So this is, of course, a decline in our different operational objectives. When we go next, what happens is in our group, we have a group strategy so this is the next slide. We work basically, over the previous one, sorry. again, a little bit previous, sorry, here. The, the AFD group approach, basically, what do we do? So we have three entities, the AFD, ProParco that works on private sector. We would work more on AFD side on the public sector, and we have the technical expertise. We work on very different, with very different instruments. It goes from equity to grants to concessional debt, etc. And we work with different actors. You can see commercial banks, public development banks, and financial regulators and what we call policy enablers. So it's a very wide range of entities. And once we've set this stage, what are we speaking of? So what is the rationale basically behind this? So what our rationale is based on two big international settings: the SDG agenda on the one side and the COP21 agenda on the other one. Both speak of finance and financial systems and financial sectors. We're speaking of alignment, we're speaking of consistency, and basically the whole idea is that money is there. The SDGs are, and COP21 is and are both very, very broad-ranging goals. And even though available finance is there, the thing is that it's not flowing towards those objectives. So what do we want to do is helping addressing all these elements and trying to put all the actors that work on the financial sector on board on this. So what is the rationale and what is Fin4Dev about now? When we've set all this stage, what we want to do is seeking to combine the SDG financing and a transition view on this sector. Basically, we want to bring in all the actors with the right mix of instruments to bring in them into basically financing all these crucial objectives with a strategic view. Financial systems are not a side element. They're not, as we would say, water that you could just pull in the system and goes out to objectives. There are actors that have to be treated as such, and not only they can orient the money that is existing towards these objectives, but also they can be catalyzers to sustainable development. And this is all the more important in the COVID context. We know that we will have to build better back. So, but to do that with the financial system, we'll have to address all the specific constraints that are existing there. So what will happen there? We're speaking of different actors. When we speak of the financial system, we spontaneously think of banks. We can think of insurers. We can think of also investment funds, stock markets, but it goes wider. We're speaking also of regulatory authorities. We're also speaking of supervisors. We're speaking of central banks. And what we want to do is put all these actors aligned and basically bringing them action and bring their capacity of action towards private investors, households, companies, and by doing that, basically helping to realize the SDG agenda, the 2030 agenda, and the COP21 agenda that is there. So we have a transition view there that basically will try to bring in all the different actors there. So what is our approach about? More concretely, we think that all these actors cannot be seen as just elements that you will bring from not financing to financing these objectives. We have to take a transition view. They will change progressively, and they will have to change strategically in the way they deal with all these objectives. And we also have to think that these are interconnected entities. So we'll have to adopt a systemic view. It is not enough to have one bank or two banks financing more SDGs or more green energies. We have to have them all changing and bringing also the regulators in. So these are the three types of projects that we want to see. You can see them illustrated. Either you can go through demand and designing an offer that basically drives these objectives into launching new markets, launching new SDG markets, launching new climate adapted and climate resilient markets. You can also go through the regulations, trying to bringing in all the different actors and shifting their strategies through direct support to their authorities, or also changing their strategies by our support. And last element, we want to also to change market practices at a very large scale and through all the different actors. So this is basically the different objectives that we have. So what are we aiming at? It's three types of objectives. One side, changing the local authorities' way of doing it. So helping them and bringing assistance, basically. Um, Another way is also scaling up financing. At the end of the day, we're trying to bring in more money into where it's more needed. The needs are tremendous, we all know it, but now we have to bring money at scale. So how would we do that also is fostering sectoral, technical, political dialogues. You can't change all these elements without having a consciousness of all the elements that we'll have to do. So this will be done by partnership, by full alignment, and the beneficiaries will be both public at starting, but also private as soon as we can. And where would we do this is in all countries where AFD is active. We would bring in, of course, all the different partners that we have. And how would we do it would be with financial and non-financial instruments adapted and basically tailor-made to the needs of all those different actors. So this may sound a bit abstract. So what would we do now is we'll get into more concrete examples. This is one example of a project that we have already implemented in Peru. And what was it about? So what's the first? Let's start by the context. We will be doing here, it's greenhousing for social markets. So what is the context in Peru? We have big market deficiencies, a housing deficit that is huge, lack of access for the financial system at a very large scale for many actors, a lack of ownership of climate and SDG related practices in the construction sector and in the financial sector too, and a very high exposure to climate change risks, and a very wide range of climates. What did we bring in? We started in 2015 working on a project with a second-tier bank, so a bank that works with banks that then lends mortgages to households. We designed a housing certification mechanism and adapted financial incentives, which drove financial offer and financial demand in a way that basically completely changed the market. So this might look a bit frightening, but it gives you an idea of what we speak of a system. We had support of the EU. We worked with the KfW, so that's the partnership view. But we also worked with the financial authorities, the financial also entities. And at the end of the day, what did we bring in? Well, in the first phase, now we're entering a second phase. The first phase, we initiated the market. So that led to more than 10,000 housing units already purchased. A complete shift in a market that basically didn't consider sustainability in the construction practices. We changed it, and basically now we can see that real estate developers are including this type of possibilities in the way that they work. Now we're entering a second phase, so that's the acceleration phase. Almost all banks now propose these mortgages. Almost all real estate developers have also included in their offers their sustainable practices and basically ways to be more efficient in energy and water. But now we're going one step further. We will be going for almost 660,000 units that will be built. So that's almost 60,000 households that will have access to improved housing, more efficient in water, in energy, and will go for more different criteria that will basically help going further in the market. So we created a market, and now we're going to better practices. And now we've included policy dialogue. So then, of course, when I say we, I'm speaking of Fondo Mi Vivienda first and foremost. We've adapted to what they need, and also the local authorities and all the ecosystem that goes around finance and the housing and real estate sector. So that's one example. Another example that we can bring in is the example of Indonesia. In Indonesia, what we did is we also started with a financial entity um, that was dedicated here, so a financial entity that was dedicated to infrastructure, and now we're starting also to work on the second phase with the local authorities. So PTSMI, that also has been a lasting AFD partner for years now. We basically worked with them to build an SDG platform and to assist in basically designing a comprehensive program to reform both the financial system, but also to help them scaling up their actions. So here again, what you can see two approaches. One that was centered on PTSMI, again with EU help, EU supports. We bring in adapted financial instruments, technical assistance, and we built with them a new strategy, and we scaled up what they were able to do basically in the SDG market. So what we did next is also with the World Bank, and now in discussion with the EU, worked with PTSMI, but also the financial regulators. And here the idea was not only to bring in SDG financing, but also designing, and discussions are still going on, but how to bring in a new climate resilient, and a climate adapted, and a climate aligned financial market. So here what we did is bringing in all the different actors to basically create also a green and climate finance market. Here you have PTSMI that is in the middle, but we're also working, and we want to work with other public investment banks and bringing in, at the end of the day, structural changes to the financial system and how it works. So here you can see basically, again, what do we want to, what are the expected impacts? At the end of the day, it's a better integration of mitigation and adaptation in the financial practices, but also in the financial regulations. Having also a structural shift in the financial actor strategies corresponding to their needs, and bringing in basically the good adapted tools to helping them in doing that. So in conclusion, and just to wrap up so that we can have the time to answer different questions, what are we bringing in through this approach? First of all is a different way of approaching financial systems and financial actors. We want to align their practices and the financial flows towards the achievement of the SDGs. Given that we're in the COVID context, the idea is, yes, build back better, but through financial systems, and bringing them in as catalyzers, but bringing them in as catalyzers, not thinking as a bank in an isolated way, but also through a systemic approach. In the two projects that were presented, we had not only one bank, but different banks. We had also the local authorities, regulatory changes. And the one hand, it was in the real estate markets and introducing new norms, but in the other way is also seeing how do we deal with the different financial systems rules in what climate is related. And what is the end game and the end way is finally increasing the SDG footprint and the climate footprint across all financial sectors and financial actors. So what do we hope? is facilitating and accelerating these transitions in the end game, so the end users for basically all the markets where we're working in, but also in the financial sectors. And how do we want to do that? Is bringing in all the tools that we have, the know-how, the expertise in development finance, but also all the partners that we're working in. So we're working currently with different partners that may be financial partners, but also donors. The EU is an important partner that we're working with, and we're thinking of other countries. Egypt could be one, but also we're working with and hoping to work with in other markets. So I will be happy to respond to your questions, and I just want at first to thank you for your attention, and I stay open to the different queries that you may have. So one question that I have here is, do I rely on existing local partners, or do I need to find partners? I would say both. It depends on the countries. In some countries we work with, we have long-standing partners, and we hope to continue working with them. But in countries where we do not work, or we work not very much, the idea will be going to find new partners. And when I say partners, I speak both of the local financial entities, but also external partners. That can be the external cooperation, be it European or not. And definitely, it will be both. So another question: How was the COVID-19 crisis affected this project, and will more funded will be directly targeted measures to recover for COVID-19? That's a very good question too. How it did affect the projects? Well, in all the ongoing projects where this approach has been set, of course, we had to change things. In some ways, for example, we had to facilitate the way in which the financial actors that we work with, how we had to ease the way in which basically they could make the money that we had lent accessible to the end users, to the SMEs, for example. So we did change things, and we did try to accelerate things as much as we could. Another element, so would more funding be directed? We hope yes. It will depend basically on how other partners also help us. Demand on the one side, but also financial partners that would help us bring in the extra money that we need to be bringing in this adapted offer that we're bringing. So what is the biggest challenge that we face, and how do we address it? I would say the challenges are two-faced. On the one hand, we have to adapt to the needs of our partners. That's the biggest challenge. And we have to adapt with changing times because things move. As we saw, for example, in the two examples that we have, the action that we started with things that looked moderate, but went bigger. So the idea is basically adapting to the needs. And for that, we also need external support. Sometimes with EFD means it will be enough. That would happen, for example, at first with Fondo Mi Vivienda. It's what happened at first in other parts. But we often need external partners as the EU, but it could be others also, to basically go and scale up and adapt in a good way. So how do we address them is, I would say, listening our best and bringing in other forces to basically team up. So another question, in this systemic approach that we advocate for, how do we ensure that we take into account and address the specificities of the local financial system? That's also a very important question. So first and foremost, we have to bring in, well, first our local knowledge when it is, or external knowledge when we don't have it. So we rely on our partners, We rely on also on external consultants. And how do we address the specificities? The best way is also having this knowledge and having specific studies to adapt basically to the demand and the offer that is needed. And how will we ultimately attract private sector investors towards these projects? And are grant incentives a key enabler? So how do we do it is indeed by bringing in adequate incentives. And when we're speaking of the private sector, it can be on different ways. It could be the financial private sector, but also the financial project sponsors. And grant incentives are very often a key element. They're not the only ones. We can sometimes cover for risks. We can also bring in long-term maturities and cheaper funding. So these are also key incentives. But the idea is how to attract private sector. We have to also we have to have a good knowledge of the needs of all those actors. The financial sector can't go by itself. It may create an offer, but it has to meet a demand. So the idea is bringing in the whole thing there, and also having another element, how to bring in the private sector, is also changing regulations. We can't go there without the regulatory and the financial authorities and the local authorities' support. Finally, how does the Fin4Dev approach imply a long-term partnership with the financial institutions that we're working in? Yes, this is also a key element. We are in transition views. So that means that the actors that we'll be working with are not single, and they will have to change progressively. So we need long-term approaches with our partners, and that's a very important element. So this being said, we could have a lot more questions, so we stand ready to answer to your queries. So on my side, Cosimo Vinclair, but also there's Thomas Josselin that can answer within the platform. And you can also reach to us directly through the local agencies in the different countries, and or directly by our contacts that we have. So we hope to bring this to a new scale and have you on board as much as we can. Thank you very much.